Good evening, everyone. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for our third speaker in the Word on the Street Fall Reading Series. Before we begin tonight, we'd like to offer a land acknowledgement that the Lethbridge Public Library acknowledges that we are gathered on the lands of the Blackfoot people of the Canadian Plains and pays respect to the Blackfoot people past, present, and future, while recognizing their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationship to the land. The city of Lethbridge is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. Tonight's speaker is Kevin Van Tighem. Kevin is a former superintendent of Banff National Park. He's written more than 200 articles, stories, and essays on conservation and wildlife, which have garnered him many awards, including Western Magazine Awards, Outdoor Writers of Canada Book and Magazine Awards, and the Journey Award for Fiction. He is the author of Bears Without Fear, The Homeward Wolf, Heartwaters, Sources of the Bow River, Our Place, Changing the Nature of Alberta, and Wild Roses Are Worth It, which we'll be discussing tonight. He lives with his wife, Gail, in Canmore, Alberta, and welcome, Kevin. It's nice to have you this evening. No, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, I am. Sorry about that.
No, it's all right.
It's a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate the venue and the good people that are apparently on the other side of this computer screen in this new world of Zoom presentations. So I'm going to move to screen share right now and pull up some slides, and I'm going to talk over the slides if that works. How do I do that? Is it projecting?
Not yet. If you just hit a screen share, it should be right at the bottom of your screen.
Yeah, okay. There you go.
Perfect.
Sorry about this. I'm not nimble with the computers. Well, thanks very much, and I appreciate the chance to discuss Wild Roses Are Worth It. If you were looking for a subtitle other than the one that the publisher chose for me, I think you probably picked It's Not All About Oil. And really, I think the underlying theme throughout the whole book is intended to be the idea that simple stereotypes of Alberta cheat us and cheat the place. We can do much better, and we pretty much have to, because we're at a time of rapid and radical change. So a little bit about the author, just because it probably provides a bit of background to the content of the book. I was born in early 1950s in Calgary, Alberta. I'm actually, my family goes back to 1875. You've got a school down there named after my great uncle, who walked across the prairies in 1875 to join the Oblate missionaries in what was at that time considered to be Canada's frontier. What was, of course, in fact, the homelands of many First Nations and Indigenous people. So anyway, the Alberta I grew up in was a smaller place. It was a poorer place. You know, we really hadn't. We were primarily an agricultural community. It was very much more rural. The cities and towns were smaller. I was talking to my wife about it today, trying to sort of reflect on it. You know, when you get to my age, you can get a little bit, you know, unrealistically nostalgic about the good old days, and it wasn't the good old days. I would say that people were more civil and more private. Certainly, I never heard my dad talk about politics in public. It just didn't happen. Well, we all do it all the time now. So that's something that's changed. It was considerably more racist, but it was sort of a naive racism in a way. Like, it was so woven into the fabric of society that people didn't even notice that it existed. We were the province was had way more biological diversity, far more wild places, far more nature, because we didn't have the population and we didn't have the technology to overwhelm it to the degree that we seem to be doing today. On the other hand, We had way fewer bears. Whooping cranes were just about extinct. It wasn't all good. We were coming out of a very exploitative era as a province. So there's been a lot of changes in my lifetime, and I've observed them through the lens of somebody that was raised in the edge of the inner city of Calgary, but spent a great deal of time hunting pheasants in the irrigation country east of the city, and fishing and exploring in the mountains and foothills to the west of the city. So it's a very blessed way to grow up in a small province with a lot of rural countryside and a family that was oriented towards getting out into it. And it gave us the chance, it gave me the chance to sort of live a sort of a hybrid urban rural life. After graduating from university at Calgary in botany, well, in my final years, I worked for the guy on the top left, Ian Jack, who was a real blessing to me. Everybody, if they're lucky, runs into a good mentor at some point in their life. And I was lucky enough to run into one when I was in my early 20s. And of course, full of wisdom, and that I was impressed with, and that actually wasn't there if anybody else looked at me. But Ian, in fact, was a very wise man. He was a very effective conservationist. He was the chief naturalist in Kootenay National Park, where I worked for 3 summers. And so working for him, I learned the importance of connecting people to stories, the importance of stories in influencing the way in which communities see themselves, see their environment, and see their potential. He was a genius at making everybody realize that they were an environmentalist, even if they weren't. I've never really known anybody with his social skills and his ability to put them to work in the cause of conservation. And the other thing I learned working for him was the importance of communication, obviously, because that was what the nature of the job is when you're working as a park interpreter. Went on from there to work for many years as a biologist, mostly in Jasper National Park, which is where the image in the center of the screen is focused. It's on Jonas Pass, sort of a poignant photograph with an old caribou antler in the cairn there. Caribou are no longer found there. And again, it goes to the changes that I've seen in my lifetime in the place that I know of as my home, and that has yet changed, so that it's like rooms vanishing in your house, and at the same time light coming into the windows of other rooms. And so I think this is the issue, is that we live in a dynamic place, in a dynamic time, and we live there largely unconsciously. And this is what I was trying to get to through my book here. I finished my career. I worked up through the ranks from wildlife biology into the management realm, and ended up as a park superintendent. My head exploded and I retired, and I pretty much recovered now. In recovering, in the post-retirement years, I was able to finally sort of get my voice activated again, because when you get into the management realm, you can't really have your own opinions. You're representing the organization you work for. So I had to suppress that obsession I had with writing and opinionating until I retired, and then I let it all out in a bang, and I produced a whole bunch of books, and some of them are illustrated there. And I also found this magazine that had turned up on the newsstands called Alberta Views, and it was kind of neat because for many years I'd been plagued by another magazine called Alberta Review, which was extreme right-wing, antagonistic, fight-picking, oil cheerleading, snarky thing that really bugged me, because it seemed to think that it spoke for Albertans, and I was an Albertan, and it sure didn't speak for me. And yet suddenly Alberta Views turned up, and here was a magazine that spoke the language of me and so many other people that I know and have known through my life. And they gave me a column. So I wrote a column called This Land, which I still write today. It turns up every second issue. That was for a number of years. And then I wrote a number of feature articles for them. So then just recently, I was, when I finished Our Place, which is the second most recent book that I put out, I started working on a very complicated project that's eating me alive and complicating my life, and making me very stressed out, because it's more demanding than some of the other things I've written. And I was in the middle of that, and I was looking through my old writings, and I thought, well, what else have I got here? I was procrastinating and trying to get diverted. And I started looking through all my collection of works that I'd done for Alberta Views, and I thought, geez, when you put these together, the sum becomes more than the equal of the parts. So there's a theme, there's a number of themes that keep emerging in the work I've done for Alberta Views, and the individual pieces don't capture the wholeness of it. So why not do a book? So I pitched that to my publisher, Rocky Mountain Books, and they reluctantly accepted it. Reluctantly, because this is a hard time in publishing, and taking on somebody's book is a bit of a risk. But they took a chance on it and they published it, and that became Wild Roses Are Worth It, which was released this spring and is in most bookstores right now, and they can all order it within less than a week if you decide after this presentation that you're interested in reading it. So what is it all about? Fundamentally, I think it probably, when I started writing it, I didn't anticipate in some ways how timely it might be. I'm hoping it's timely because we are at a time of radical change in this province. A bunch of the assumptions that probably defined most of our understanding of this place, certainly for my generation, can't be relied on anymore. The oil era is in trouble. We did very well on oil for 30, 40 years there as a province. Almost, I would say, we did far too well on oil because it allowed us to create a very skewed and vulnerable economy. And we're dealing with those consequences now as our oil becomes too expensive compared to other sources of oil, and the world starts looking for alternatives aggressively. There's people that are going down kicking and screaming, but I'm sorry, the oil era is over. So what does that mean to Alberta? And at the same time, and as part of that issue, climate change, it's one of the things that's driving the transition from oil to other energy sources. But it's not just doing that, it's affecting our place, the place where we live in. We just came out of an incredible summer of heat and smoke. It's only recently that we saw our latest 100-year floods. We seem to have 100-year floods every 10 years now. We lost up to 7 meters, actually, in the case of the North Saskatchewan Glacier, 10 meters of ice thickness this year to ice melt. Those glaciers are vanishing in our lifetime. And of course, overlaid on the whole thing in the last 2 or 3 years, last couple of years, has been this pandemic that we just can't seem to shake ourselves loose from. So, in some ways, it looks like the end is near, as Bart, as Homer was saying in the bottom corner there. But I would say that the end has always been near, and it's never arrived, and it never will. But the next Alberta is near. And how do we think about that, and how do we talk about that? Because we are the ones that are going to make it, and we're the ones that are going to live in it. And so, a number of years ago, I took a management course, and the person that taught that management course, her main theme for the session that we went through was, she said, an organization is simply a bunch of conversations. And I thought it was just such a neat metaphor, and I've built on that in my own reflections since then. And really, that's what a place is. Alberta is simply the conversations we have and the possibilities that those conversations create. And what I'm hoping to do with Wild Roses Are Worth It is to help to contribute to our conversations in a way that makes them broader and deeper and bigger than where they go if they are only limited to the idea that somebody is messing up our ability to sell our oil, which is a really small and shallow perspective from which to talk about the future. So basically, a little excerpt actually from the book here. And this is going to be hard for me to read because I've got little icons sitting over top of it. But you can read it for yourselves here. I'll be doing some readings a little bit later in the session here. But in the introduction to the book, I talk about how Alberta's school children were canvassed in 1930 to come up with a flower for the province, and they chose the wild rose. And it's interesting to think of all those naive and innocent and eager little grade 7 kids sitting in schools around the province, mostly rural schools and small town schools, picking a flower for a province that was about to go into the dirty 30s, and nobody knew it. They knew that things were rough because the stock markets had hardly crashed, but nobody knew it was coming over that next decade, and it was a rough decade. And then it was followed by a war that took all of our men overseas and messed up our economy. put stresses on women and families like never before. So what I'm saying is we are in a time as far as 1930 when kids unaware of crashing stock markets and looming farm disasters happily chose a flower for the home province they thought they knew so well. Wild roses still bloom here every year, but they symbolize something different now than they did in 1930, and certainly than they did during our half century of prosperity and excess. What exactly is wild rose country now at another time of disruption and change? And that's the question in the book that I wander around but never actually answer, because there is no author in this province, no thinker in this province who could provide an answer to that. We collectively will provide the answer, but maybe we can at least have the right conversation so we get to an answer that'll work. So in terms of the book itself, it's a collection of 800 words pieces and much longer 3,000 word essays that come at the questions of who we are and where we are from a number of directions. One of them is to understand and glory in the nature of this place, because it's the place itself, it's the nature of this place that gives us our meaning. What makes Alberta Alberta is that it's not everywhere else. So where is it? What do we know about it? And I don't think we sometimes spend enough time looking around us at where we actually are and how it works and what it offers us in terms of meaning. I'm going to read a little section from one of the little essays that I really liked, just because it's exploded upon me. One of the neat things about writing is that you never know what's going to come out. If you sit down knowing what you're going to write, you aren't writing, because writing is a creative process. It emerges. And this is what emerged in that particular essay. And it was based on the idea, a reflection on having been in the middle of a deciduous forest, an aspen forest in Alberta on a hot August day, after the birds have stopped singing for the year, and it just got so still and quiet sometimes. The world was verdant and alive, but so still as to seem a lifeless diorama of itself. Even in that calm, however, life shimmered everywhere. Every leaf, millions upon millions of them, was pulling gases out of the air into translucent cells where billions of chloroplasts, like microscopic solar panels, trapped the light of the sun. Each chloroplast was using that transmuted sunshine to change carbon dioxide extracted from the air and water and trace minerals drawn up from the forest soil into living matter. Medieval alchemists frequently poisoned themselves or went bankrupt in their quest to find a way to change other substances into gold and inert metal. But no human alchemy could ever equal the magic that unfolds silently in the leaves that shade our summer afternoons. Sunshine, air, and water converted not just into energy, but into life itself. While I watched the flickering mystery of the forest canopy overhead, down beneath the forest floor, a secret society of roots was probing into the dark of the earth, pulling water out of the soil and feeding it into the wood cells that pipe it up the trees into the leaves. Insects foraged among the green canopy. In devouring living leaves, they were turning plant matter into protein and chitin. And the quiet birds hunting those insects would transmute them in turn into living muscle and fat. When forest birds migrate, their tiny bodies are entirely composed of new life that arose from photosynthesis in the leaves among which they were hatched. They may fly above it, but they can never leave the forest because they are entirely made of it. Those are actually colorful bits of forest that migrate to faraway places each fall. Fancy that. So it seems to me that there's a great deal of meaning and inspiration to be found by exploring the very nature of the places we and stepping back from seeing things as scenery, but trying to see inside them to see how they work. And that's one of the things I tried to contribute in some of the essays there. I think another big part of this is knowing our own stories. When you think about your life, and again, I'm an old geezer, right? I'm in my late 60s here, so I spent a lot of time lost in nostalgia, reflecting on the past. But when you think about it, your life is a series of stories, really. You have a personal narrative, and that's called a lifetime. And as you live those stories, just like every story, just like every parable in the Bible, like every teaching story in every religious text that was ever written, your stories are teaching experiences. You learn from them. If you reflect upon them, they're not just the narrative of a life. They're an exposition of meaning and purpose and learning and intent. So we need to know our own stories, and we need to know not just the stories of ourselves, but of our neighbors, because collectively those stories are the stories of this place. And then we need to tell them to create our own narrative of place and belonging. Um, we live in a treaty place here. Alberta wouldn't exist were it not for the treaties. The people that entered into those treaties were from two different sectors. One of them had their relationship with this place was all based on story and narrative. The others had stories that they brought with them, and they imposed them on this place. They tried to impose them on this place. Well, the treaties were signed in the late 1800s. We've had a century and a half of Alberta since then. We've created a lot of stories together now, some good, some bad, but we need to know them. We need to tell them, because that makes us who we are. And knowing who we are tells us who we can be. I'm trying to move my screen and it's not doing it. There you go. Another related theme is to challenge received wisdom, and especially when we receive that wisdom from vested interests. And this is one that gets to me, is that, you know, we are, I believe, in Alberta, or we became in Alberta through 30 years of prosperity, of relatively easy prosperity because of the wealth that we had buried beneath us. We became a bit complacent. Life was good. We were prosperous. The economy was expanding. Opportunities were expanding. And we came to assume that that would go on forever, which is one of our problems, because nothing goes on forever, and certainly that won't. But the other piece is that you tend to become a bit domesticated. You don't really worry about much stuff because things come so easily. And so we let other people tell us what to think. And people resist that. You know, there's this myth of us as a bunch of rugged individuals, and, you know, with our own independent minds. But no, we take a lot of things that we're told at face value. We're told that mountain pine beetles are a problem. Mountain pine beetles are not a problem. They're a solution to what climate change is going to be doing in our forests. We're told that Alberta is all about oil. Alberta is not all about oil. Oil is one part of our economy, a shrinking part. We've always been about much more than oil. But we're told all these things, and we accept them at face value because, you know, why worry about it? We're going fishing this weekend. We're going golfing. We're going to buy some new toys and go and have some fun. We're gonna hang out with our kids or whatever. You know, we let other people tell us how to think. And one of those things is that every landscape should be a working landscape, and that's a good thing. And it goes back to probably biblical thinking that the world was created for our use, and so we got to use it. We got to put it to work. Well, here's another essay, another little bit of short reading from one of the essays called Working Landscapes. None of those working landscapes ever apply for the job. But in a society that accrues material wealth by exploiting natural resources, land is simply forced to do the work we've assigned it. The same business interests who are so enamored of the word of working landscape also love the term multiple use, and often mention both in the same breath. We expect land to do several jobs at once: produce wood for mills, surrender oil and gas to be burned, feed cows, and be mined for its gravel, coal, and other subterranean assets. So these aren't just working landscapes, they're multitasking ones. We're toiling away at tasks they never signed up for. When a human being is given no choice but to work at a job he or she never asked for, that's called slavery. By that definition, there are no working landscapes, only enslaved ones. The only free landscapes would be our parks and protected areas, and the remaining bits of the province that haven't yet been indentured to one or more resource companies. Far from having been sterilized, protected areas are places where land is allowed to do its real work, because every one of those landscapes was already hard at work. They work at capturing rain and snow and filtering it through green vegetation and spongy soils into groundwater aquifers that feed springs, rivers, and downstream communities. They grow diverse plant communities that pull carbon dioxide from the air and put oxygen back in. They work tirelessly at providing habitat for native plants, animals, and fish, and spiritual renewal for many thousands of people. They hold memory, meaning, and life. Alberta's enslaved landscapes were never unemployed to start with, and most of the jobs that we force them to do impair their ability to do their real work. I don't think you can write with change and the need to challenge received wisdom at a time of change without being a bit provocative. And I'm going to be even more provocative in the next one, because I think another one is that we do need to take Jim Prentice's advice much more seriously than we were prepared to do back a few years ago, before we were humbled by subsequent events. We need to look in the mirror, and we need to be ruthlessly honest about what we see there. So here's another reading from a book called Oil Sucks. And if there's somebody here that's deeply invested in the idea that it's all about oil, please excuse me for the stress I'm about to put you through, but this stuff needs to be said. Oil Sucks is really based on the analogy that our economic and social addiction to oil is in fact an addiction, and that all the behaviors, everything that is around that, reflects and mirrors the behavior of addicts. Addicts don't just ignore the harm that compulsions cause to friends and family, they ignore their own well-being. Alberta has over 320,000 kilometers of unreclaimed seismic lines riddling our landscape with erosion scars that choke streams and reservoirs with silt. Over 330,000 oil and gas wells, this is out of date now, penetrate our drinking water aquifers and leak methane into the atmosphere. More than 384,000 kilometers of pipelines are slowly deteriorating underground. The oil sands region has over 220 kilometers squared of toxic tailings ponds. Nobody has a viable plan for reclaiming them, even though they already contaminate the region's waters. Oil industry flax, again, this is a bit dated, this story. I should have said the war room. That was before we had one. Oil industry flax get paid to jump on statements like this with reassurances that wells and tailing ponds don't leak and in the industry's environmental performance is improving. When it comes to glib assurances, big oil can out tobacco big tobacco, another industry that profits from addiction. But guess what? Cigarettes do indeed cause cancer and heart disease, and methane does in fact leak from oil and gas wells, and those tumors in fish downstream from Fort McMurray are not actually natural. Some will consider this blasphemy coming from a fourth-generation Albertan. Looking back over those generations, however, I don't see many oil jobs. My family has worked mostly in other sectors of the economy. That shouldn't be surprising. There are actually other ways of making a living in Alberta. Farming and ranching come to mind. Installing wind and solar generation. Forestry, tourism, education, medicine, manufacturing, writing. Well, maybe not writing. The list goes on. But from the chatter in the opium den, you think oil was our only truth. Here's a truth. The Alberta government actually collects more money from our other addictions, alcohol and gambling, than from oil and gas royalties. That's because after more than 20 cuts to royalty rates, oil and gas companies now pocket our share of petroleum profits. But as addicts, we'll settle for crumbs as long as the oil flows. Oil interests usually cheerlead for free enterprise capitalism and small government, and eager to support the dealers of their opiate. Many Albertans do the same, but most of the oil industry is pure socialism. Capitalism only shows up on one side of the ledger. Most oil companies are capitalists where profits are concerned, but dedicated socialists with regard to risks, research expenses, and environmental costs. We taxpayers paid for the university research that made oil sands production possible. Taxpayers now not only finance public relations programs for public pipeline companies, but assume industry risks by buying lines outright and building them. Having socialized our own responsibilities, the oil industry shamelessly cajoled a series of so-called conservative governments into reducing royalties. We now keep barely more than $1 loonie for every $100 of profit from the sale of our own bitumen. The Alberta Energy Regulator estimates it will cost more than $260 billion to clean up the industry's environmental messes. There's nowhere near that amount of money in the public coffers to cover that cost. But addicts don't worry about tomorrow. They just want their next hit. So it made me a bit nervous writing that essay and taking these repeated hits at the oil obsession that this prophet says, because it goes right to the heart of what's hurting a lot of people right now. there are families whose breadwinners aren't winning bread right now, and they're in trouble. They put all their eggs in the oil basket, and the oil basket is crumbling around them. And this is hard. And people, when they hear this sort of thing, they can take it personally. And this is not meant to challenge us as Albertans. It's meant to challenge our myths. We Albertans are far more than the oil myth. And we need to see that and see ourselves as not just dependent on oil, not just dependent on the pusher turning up on the street tomorrow. It's still our street. We can do other things here. And this is until we've reached the point that we can look in the mirror, see those sorts of things, and then look past the mirror and see that there's other possibilities. We're going to be trapped in nostalgia that doesn't take us to the future. And we seem to be seeing that happen in some ways politically in this province right now, is that there are politicians thriving on the fact that people aren't in denial. I think I'm trying to provide a counter medicine to that. I'm trying to be one of the voices that drowns out the backward lookers and opens up the possibility for a better future created by the people that live here in this place that we are so fortunate to live in. So we need to be paying attention. We need to be willing to defend the things that matter. And the things that matter are much more than just us, much more than just the job we have today or the job we had yesterday. It's everything that surrounds us, and it's and everything that makes us who we are. One of the things that I think we need to do most, and it sort of circles back that idea about knowing our own story and telling our own story, is to be our best selves. To always step above our worst inclination and our most negative impulses, and to listen to the voices of our best neighbors and to amplify them. And so this is where I have my last reading before I get to the end of this and open it up for questions and discussion, of which I'm hoping there'll be some. And this is from another column called from Our Best Stories. Aritha Van Herk popularized the idea that Alberta's culture is defined by its mavericks, larger-than-life risk-takers who grabbed our sprawling natural landscapes and shook fortunes out of them. It's an attractive creation myth for those who see resource exploitation as a way to accumulate wealth. As such, it's been wildly misappropriated to support a vision of this place founded on greed and ambition. Further afield, Alberta is seen as a land of defiant rednecks and pickup trucks. Visit the foothills on a May-long weekend, and that stereotype might not seem far from the mark. At least until the latest downturn in Alberta, oil and gas prices, anyone could come in from away and become an instant Alberta, a pickup truck, a monster home, a ball cap, and a case of beer. But that version of Alberta leaves out the stealth foxes and Cartwrights, whose quiet work and self-sacrifice not only built our province, but preserved much of it from the reckless exploitation that continues to make it less than it was meant to be. It omits conservationists like Kerry Wood and Grant McEwen, who gave us a very different set of stories about what Alberta is and who Albertans are. Lois Hole and Jean Loughy, champions of the arts, built heritage and philanthropy, don't contribute much to the greed-based story of Alberta, but they too are among the real Albertans who define us at our best. The quiet labors of Indigenous people like Kansi Fox and Api Supanak, who work to restore their lands and cultures from the ravages of colonialism, go ignored when a province lets itself be defined by tales of pillage and privilege. This place we love has never lacked for people who love it back. We just don't give them enough airtime. In the beginning, there was the Word, it says in the book of Genesis. Who controls the Word controls the story, and a culture is the product of stories. As Alberta struggles once again to shape a sustainable future in the face of another bust in the oil patch, it might be well to revisit the stories by which we define ourselves. Wild Rose Country's best stories, Alberta's true Genesis stories, don't derive from exploitation. They come from the kind of deep commitment to our home place that expresses itself in caring stewardship of its lands, water, fish, wildlife, and communities. We have lots of those stories, and we have it in us to make a great many more. I forgot a few clicks. So I'd just like to conclude with a bit of thanks and gratitude here. I'm glad that we've already done a land acknowledgement, but I'd like to thank Rocky Mountain Books, obviously, for continuing to have faith in me and to publish my works. Evan Ossington and Jackie Flanagan and the rest of the Alberta Views team. Wow, what a neat family they belong to. What a fortunate crossing of paths in terms of my life as a writer and the opportunities that they gave me to amplify some of these thoughts and ideas. Certainly, I'd like to thank Lethbridge Public Library and the Word on the Street program. I mean, here we are. And the many good, caring Albertans who have so generously shared their stories and wisdom over the course of my life. So much of what I write is not my story, it's their story. And they've been kind enough to share it and to make that a part of my life and to make that a part of my work. So thank you to all of them. And most of all, thank you to Wild Rose Country. It will always be there for us as long as we're always there for it. And it's the best place in the world to be. So thanks very much. And I'm going to stop screen sharing now, and then hopefully there'll be some discussion and debate and questions. Oh, there we go.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, Kevin. Just a note to our audience, if you have any questions for Kevin, you can, our chat is disabled, but you can click at the bottom of your screens. There's a Q&A button. Just click on the Q&A button and you can type in your question, and then I'll read it out loud to Kevin and he can offer his response. So just to start things out, I have sort of a question about how you put the book together. You've written hundreds of articles and essays, and how did you distill it down to just a small collection of what we have here in Wild Roses Are Worth It?
It was it was an interesting exercise because I had tons of raw material, but it was never, none of those things were ever written with the idea of ever compiling them. So I had to sort of, first of all, say, well, if the book works as a body of work, what are the sections? And so I've got one section on it, basically writing about nature, which is where I try and expose the complexity and beauty of the place we live in. Other ones where I think, okay, well, what are the issues around farming in the province? What are the issues around parks in particular areas? You know, like what are the themes, the big themes? And then I started looking through my back library saying, well, where do I find pieces that illustrate that? And then I had to sort of say, well, how do I put them in an order so that they flow one into the other, or so that they build on each other, that they're not just sort of dumped in there. It's a bit tricky. It's never as easy as when you're writing a book like, you know, Heartwaters, where you start off with an idea and you write it from scratch, because then, I think it sort of worked. I hope it worked.
Well, as I mentioned before we began the program to you, I finished the book a couple days ago, and I definitely think it worked. And I really, some of the selections you picked, some of the imagery and everything of this, some of your personal experiences, you can really feel the connection that you have to our Alberta wilderness. It was wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate that.
So is there any works that you didn't have a chance to include that you regret not being able to put into the book?
Oh yeah, there always is, and I'm still writing them, right? It's funny. I think that since starting working on that book, it's actually affected my column writing, because I feel like I'm sort of writing it into the book in a way now. So it's actually slightly modified my voice a bit too, you know.
Interesting.
It's like a more self-conscious kind of writing. I'm not sure whether that's good or bad, but it's it certainly means that you create a different level of expectation for yourself as a writer when you start thinking bigger than just the piece itself, you know.
Right. So I was reading in the news a couple of weeks ago that Alberta's energy minister said that the current spike in oil prices isn't enough reason to require the industry to spend more on cleaning up the tens of thousands of abandoned oil and gas wells that are still in the province. What are your thoughts on this? Should we be spending more as oil prices go up to try and clean up these abandoned wells?
Well, this goes back to that oil sucks essay here, to that whole problem of how are we thinking about things? We've lost we really lost our ability to step back and and live consciously in this province as responsible people with a long-term vision, because we just don't care as long as the money flows. Peter Lougheed is famous for having said that when it comes to our oil and gas resources, we need to think like owners, and we don't. We think like serfs. We are happy because the oil companies leave us a bit of money in our paychecks and our hockey arenas or whatever. But they're not Alberta. They're just companies making money, and several of them have left the province. Some of them moved here from Houston or from down east. A lot of them have moved back. They have no loyalties to this place, but this place is our home place, and that's our oil and gas. And so, no, the environment minister is dead wrong, but I'm not surprised by it, because she thinks the way that we've been conditioned to thinking in this province. And she knows that in expressing that line of thought, there won't be much resistance, because she's talking to a bunch of addicts that have stopped thinking for themselves. Those wells will never be reclaimed, I can safely predict, because there will never be the money to reclaim them, because the money is going out of the province, because we've reduced the royalties. And now that money is starting to temporarily come back because it's higher prices and our resources are worth more. We're not going to keep that money or force the companies that are extracting that money to clean up their messes. We're going to say, give us a few more scrapings, and don't worry, we'll take care of that mess after you're gone. Well, that's not going to work. That does not work. That does not give you a future. But that's the small Alberta that we've become because of our obsession and addiction to oil. And it's too bad. The piper is going to be paid. Maybe there's enough of us now that are skeptical about the things we're seeing and recoiling from the experiences that we've been through the last 2 or 3 years, that we can force our politicians to think differently, and that we can force some accountability on the companies that are exploiting our future here. Maybe. I would like to hope so. I would like to hope that Wild Roses might encourage people to feel a little bit less lonely in the thought that less like they're the only ones that are worried about what's going on here, and feel that things need to be changed. But this is sheer insanity, leaving those wells down through our aquifers and not dealing with them when there's money to deal with them, so that some guy in Houston or some guy with a yacht in the Caribbean Ocean can get a little bit richer.
Yeah. In talking to people, it seems that everyone is Alberta has become so reliant on oil. Like it's sort of seen as our only industry, and people are panicked if we ended up getting rid of the oil industry or trying to move away from it. Our entire economy is going to collapse, and people aren't going to be able to support their families. Do you think we can actually break this addiction to the oil industry and move on to cleaner industries? Or
I don't know if we can break it. We're going to be broken from it. I mean, we will be forced into cold turkey. It's over. There is no more money in conventional oil and gas. There are no conventional oil and gas companies in this province that are making money. They're all going bankrupt. The only money that's coming out of the oil and gas sector now is from the oil sands, and that's because we're ignoring the big environmental liabilities up there. We're just sort of kicking that can down the road, filling up the landscape with these leaking toxic waste pits, while we take one last kick at the cat here. So it's not a question of can we. We will. Alberta will exist after oil and gas is no longer a significant contributor to the economy, and that might even happen in our lifetimes. We're on that line now, but we have the best sun energy resources in Canada. We have the best wind. My God, our property down the Old Man River, I can tell you, we've got wind. We've got lots of wind to spare. We've got geothermal resources because of all those darn holes we punched in the ground. We've got lots of ways to move on, but we can't move on as long as we got this oil and gas thing anchored to our feet, dragging us back and leaving a black smear all over our province. So will it be easy? Will it be fun? No, it will not be. We are in difficult times, but we've been in difficult times before and we came through them. You know, I go back to that analogy of the wild rose becoming the province's emblem. Think about 1943 Alberta. All the men are overseas. We've been broke for a year. The farms are all blown away. There's no hope at all for the future. I mean, if you're in that moment and you're looking around at all the experiences that you've committed to that point and everything you can see at that point, where's the hope? And yet, my generation, the baby boom generation, was the 1950s and 1960s, which was one of the most prosperous times in the history of this province. We didn't see it coming, but it came. So there's always possibilities, there's always hope, but it means that we need to be clear-eyed and clear-minded, and we need to get away from the old thinking that will no longer serve us and find the new thinking. And we find the new thinking in where we are and in who we are. It's always been there. We just sort of let it sort of get buried underneath an oil slick.
Yeah, it's so interesting when you mention wind power and solar. Like here in Lethbridge, I think we're one of the sunniest places in all of Canada and North America. And to say that we have wind would probably be an understatement. I think it's not a regular day unless it's windy in Lethbridge.
Think about all the times that you walk down the main street in a small Alberta town, sweating your buns off because there's no shade, or walked across a great big asphalt parking lot into a shopping mall, waiting to get into that air conditioning because it's so bloody hot out there. Well, wouldn't it be nice to have a bunch of solar panels over your head?
Yeah,
wouldn't that be cool? That would also be an economy. But you know, we aren't there yet.
Hopefully soon, but I think it's going to take some time. But we had a comment from the audience. Chelsea just wanted to mention, she says, this talk has been great for feeling less lonely about these issues, and to thank you. And it brings me to another question that I had to sort of for you is, how do you think since there's such a focus on the oil industry, for those who are interested in conservation and trying to get to more environmentally better practices, how do you think we can try and instill that in the greater sort of community in Alberta?
You know, I think it is ingrained there more than maybe we think, and it goes back to that reflection on my own family and how few of us have actually, my siblings and my older relatives have ever worked in the oil sector. I mean, there are many people working and living in Alberta that are conservation oriented. It's actually part of our wiring. It's just that it doesn't get much airplay. It's that piece that doesn't get told about. And I think the most inspiring thing to me that's happened recently that tells me that there's a huge possibility here that we can turn the tide and turn it in a timely way is the explosion of public concern over the current government proposal to open up the eastern slopes to coal strip mining. You know, they thought that would be a slam dunk because they bought into that vision of Alberta, which is we're a bunch of resource exploiters and it's all about carbon fuels. And they thought, well, you know, this will be easy. We'll open up the slopes to coal mining and there'll be jobs and that'll make Albertans happy. No, it made Albertans furious. I've never seen anything like it. There's a Facebook page with over 37,500 people following it of Albertans. I've never seen so many Albertans from so many different sectors of society, First Nations, ranchers, irrigation farmers, urban people, hippies, everybody. They've all come together, and it's neat because they've all come together as Albertans and as a diverse body of Albertans, and they've all come together to defend something beautiful about Alberta, which is our eastern slopes and the water that those slopes provide us. Well, that is Alberta becoming its best self. And so God bless Jason Kenney for opening up the eastern slopes to coal, because he enabled us to realize that we care about something more than just exploiting the heck out of the place that we live in. He didn't intend that outcome. It's the only good thing he ever did, and he's probably kicking himself for it. But you know, to me, it's a great source of inspiration and hope, and we need to build on that. We don't need, you know, they're going to blink, they're going to walk away. We're not going to end up with a bunch of coal strip mines out there. I mean, they'd be crazy. Well, maybe they are crazy, but they'd be crazy to pursue that much further. But what they've done is they've left a body of connection that we don't want to lose, because we've connected to one another across gulfs that used to exist. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that nobody, no ranchers were talking to environmentalists. It wasn't that long ago that Indigenous people had to shout to make themselves heard, and then they were immediately ignored. Well, now they're all working together, and these are the people that comprise Alberta. These are us. These are the treaty people. These are the people of this place, and they're being pulled together by their love for the place and their concern for its future. Let's never leave that behind. This is what's going to give us our future.
And
because this is us.
Sort of walking around town and driving to work, even the number of signs that people have in their lawn now, protesting about the strip mining, about our provincial parks. So it's nice to see that those voices are out there, because I think you hear from the war room all the time, and they're trying to express their views, but it's nice to see that there is a sort of counterpoint out there, and the people are starting to express their concerns about the current practices.
Yeah, I think the challenge is always that it's easy to motivate people with anger, and so when you see those park signs, you see those coal signs, that's a reaction. That's a negative thing. Something was threatened that people got angry, and that's the easy part. And it's a bread and butter of Alberta political parties. They all get elected on somebody's anger. The trick is to take that anger and pull from it the love that motivates it, and then to build into the future in a positive way. To say, okay, we know what we're against. Now let's talk about what we are for, and let's make it happen. We create our future. We tell our own story. So maybe we can tell a better story now that we're all pulled together around the stories that we don't want to have to live with.
You mentioned that one of the parts of the book that I really enjoyed that interested me, was when you're talking about the reintroduction of bison into some of the different areas in the province. And we're such an integral part to our Indigenous cultures here in Alberta. What do you think we can take? I'm sure there's other things that we can take from our Indigenous peoples here in Alberta and work to sort of help shape our future.
Well, I think when you look at the Bison story, the part that as I was researching it and interviewing people, and one of the most compelling interviews I did was with Dr. Leroy Littlebear. It was just mind blowing. I spent an hour with them, and I didn't ever want to let them go. I mean, it was sort of head exploding just talking to them and starting to see the world that I was trying to write into come at me from a different dimension, and First Nations people in this province have lost a lot to the mistakes that we made in the 20th century. Disastrous amounts that they've lost. They've lost their stories. They've lost many of them have lost their language. We all know that story, or if we don't, we should. But it's always there's much that they haven't lost, and there's much that can be brought back. And the story of the bison, when you think about the bison shaped the plains. The bison with their wallows, with their trails, with their grazing patterns, they shaped that ecosystem. But they also shaped a culture, and they also shaped a way of thinking and of seeing the world that is best expressed certainly in our region with the Blackfeet and the Plains Cree people. And when the bison went, we lost all the richness in the ecosystem. We lost a great part of the culture, and we lost a big part of the language. I remember Leroy Littlebear saying to me, our songs and our ceremonies and our language are have so much based on the bison, but when our young people look out, the bison's not there. Well, if the bison comes back, even in part of the province, it creates the possibility of rediscovering the nature of the place as it's shaped by bison, but also of revitalizing and restoring and reconciling the 20th century by creating the tangible, living, biotic piece that sits at the heart of whole cultures here, and weaving it into the culture of the rest of the people that came here that for whom it wasn't part of their story, who came from places where their stories were based on, you know, cathedrals and farm villages and things that were European. So to me, the more I wrote that bison story, the more excited I got. I thought, you know, this is impossible that you can have free-ranging bison in this province. It's impossible. We got fences, we got property ownership, we got deeds and things like that, ways of doing things, but it's not impossible. They might just do it once there's enough of them out there. They might just spread. I mean, like we see elk all over the foothills, maybe we'll see bison all over the foothills, and that would change everything, you know. And so it's one of those things again where we need to understand and glory in the nature of this place. That means in some cases we have to restore it. But then from that, we need to extract the stories. And from those stories, we got to extract the possibilities, and they create whole different avenues into a whole different set of possible futures than the ones that we restricted ourselves to. It. I think, you know, the bison is an animal, but it's also a metaphor. It's also a spiritual presence. And that was a really cool story to work on. It almost became a book. It might yet.
We have a comment from one of our attendees. They just want to say thanks for providing us with a multi-dimensional view of Alberta rather than the one-dimensional view we're served up daily. It's kind of refreshing to be honest about our present and accept and embrace change. I think that you're a true maverick.
There we go. That's how to use that term.
Somebody else, we just had another comment that just popped up here. Thanking you for offering your encouragement on how we can come together to heal divisions caused by a political climate that portrays Albertans concerned about our ecology as somehow being enemies of the province's progress.
No, we are the province.
Yeah. Well, we just have a few minutes left, so I'll just ask you before we finish up, do you have any upcoming projects that you can talk about that are going to be coming out?
Well, you know, that book continues to plague me, but God help me, I don't know when it'll ever be finished. It won't be for a few years yet. It's a big project, but nothing major on the writing side other than my regular column in Alberta Views. And I certainly encourage anybody that doesn't subscribe to Alberta Views to consider subscribing. I'm not the only one writing in it, and there's some neat voices there. So there's that, but I think the other thing is lately I've worked on a couple of video projects. So yesterday we just launched a new video called Running Dry that explores the connection between our water security, our rivers, and the eastern slopes that produce those rivers. I'm pretty proud of that effort. It was I just did a bit of the writing and coordinating, but the filming and editing was done by Yvan LaBelle and my son Brian Van Tighem, and it was released by the Livingston Landowners. So that's another project that I'm pretty excited about. And if people haven't seen it and want to, it's live online. They just need to go to Livingston Landowners, Google Livingston Landowners, and go into their website, and you'll find the video there. So working on videos has been kind of fun too, because it's a different kind of storytelling. It's visual, yeah. Right? And in some ways it saves you a lot of words because the place tells its own stories. Like they say, pictures worth 1,000 words.
Exactly. Well, that puts us right almost at 8 o'clock here. I just wanted to thank Kevin for joining us this evening. It's been wonderful having you. And thank you to Shar as well, who is our ASL interpreter tonight. Just a reminder to our audience that our next session for the Word on the Street Fall Reading Series will be on November 4th. And we'll be talking to Christine McLeod, and she'll be discussing her book, In Praise of Retreat, which in an online interview. And again, Kevin, thank you very much. It's been fascinating talking to you, and it's been a wonderful experience having you join us.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Char, and thank you, everybody else. It's been a pleasure.
Have a good night, everyone.
You too.